Hey everybody, welcome back into the Lettermen Lounge at Roosters on Olentangy River Road in beautiful, sunny, warm Columbus, Ohio. This is Lettermen Live, and we got a lot of Ohio State offseason talk to get into again, but football season is over. We had a national championship game last month. We had the Super Bowl on Sunday night. Bob, we got to just be thankful for that. We didn't know 5 months ago that we'd get either of those things.
Yeah, if you look at college football, obviously it was more of a truncated season. They cut down the Big Ten significantly. SEC, ACC played a little bit more, not nearly as much in the non-conference. Big 12, Pac-12 also abbreviated a little bit, but we had the playoff. That was there. You had the bowl games. There's a lot of people around here excited about it. You can hear the enthusiasm, the energy in their voice. And if you look at the NFL, 256 regular season games. Every playoff game was played. I think probably the most impressive thing about the playoffs is when you get there, you can't delay those games. And all of the key players, if you will, the quarterbacks, like the elite stars that people wanted to see, I don't know if they had a different testing protocol or whatever happened, because it would have been terrible last night if Tom Brady or Pat Mahomes couldn't have played. But all of those games went off relatively without a hitch. And so it was a successful season. I think some people maybe didn't want to see it played. They did it safely. They did a good job. Amazed at how when you can have a reduced capacity stadium and you can have 7,500 of the seats allocated to first responders, frontline healthcare workers, and yet you still have the nonsense of the dude out there in some sort of man singlet thong gets out on the field and is running around. I'm like, you have like 35, 40%. Half the people there are cutouts. Where did this guy come from?
How did he slip through? And all the pandemic protocols that were in place and the security and space. Like, how does that still happen?
Where was his mask?
But you know what? That's part of the Super Bowl. That's part of big games. You got to have where was his mask. That's Bobby Carpenter, Michael Bennett, Spencer Holbrook jumping in with us this week on Lettermen Live. But, it's really impressive that we got through all this. Must have been some of that SEC football protocol that got the NFL to the finish line. Good for them, because I'm glad that we got it. Maybe now 2021 will be a little bit more normal. You guys in the middle have had a little bit of experience with the guy who won last night at quarterback for Tampa Bay. 7 rings now. Just to put that in perspective, his alma mater has 2 wins in its biggest rivalry in the span that he's won 7 Super Bowls. It's pretty remarkable what Tom Brady has done. I don't know that you can argue with the GOAT status for him at this point.
Yeah, there was a couple years ago where Tom Brady maybe had 5 championships and people were still kind of like, oh, well, is it the Patriots? Is it Belichick? Is it the system? Whatever it is. I think after his 6th, you would have a hard time convincing anybody that he wasn't the greatest of all time. And then he goes to a brand new conference, a brand new division, brand new team, brand new coach, all this stuff, and still manages to take the freaking Tampa Bay Buccaneers not only to the Super Bowl, but through Mahomes, through Rodgers, through Breeze, and win it. And there's nothing you can do. I don't understand any more Tom Brady hatred. It's like at this point, I'm thankful I was alive during the time to watch this dynasty get built, and to see this just elite competitor fight year after year at the age of 43 to go win another Super Bowl. I've got nothing but respect for him. I'm thankful I got to watch him. Mahomes is no slouch. He looked like he might have been a little banged up last night. But the guy, Mahomes you see that completely horizontal pass that hit his receiver in the face. You can't script that. You can't do anything about that. And somehow the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were able to come away with a win. And I got nothing but love for Tom Brady from that.
It's amazing the arc where he was the aw shucks guy at the beginning, and then all of a sudden people began to hate him because he wins so much in the dynasty, and you always get sick of it. And then when he was in New England, let's be honest, they weren't the most endearing franchise to everybody. People in Boston, I'm not speaking about all Bostonians, but there's a stereotype that comes along with it. And I think people understand that, hey, they might not be the most friendly people, especially when they're winning. So there's that issue. And then also
which was happening a lot in multiple sports.
Oh, yeah. Yes. And so you got to just get sick of them. It wears you out. It wears you out. The one thing, though, about Tom Brady is he is legitimately one of the nicest guys I've ever been around. And the guy you see afterwards, talking about this and learning everybody's name on the team, and everybody takes that for granted. Tom Brady doesn't need to know the 6th linebacker, on the team, or the 4 or 5 defensive practice squad guys. They're of no importance to him, except for the fact that he's a leader, and it's important for him for the camaraderie piece. And that is why you saw him go to Tampa Bay. They struggled at the beginning, but much like when he was in New England, they just get better and better, and they always have that inflection point. And the on to Cincinnati comment, is infamous now. Like, they got smoked by Kansas City early on. They come back and tighten the game up. But at that point, I mean, we've talked about it. They won 8 straight games, and they went on the road and beat some really good teams. Drew Brees, Pat Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, Hall of Famers, MVPs.
Yeah.
And they did it. And he elevated everybody. You can see the interaction that he has with guys on both sides of the ball. It's something that's very, very rare in sports. And in a sport like football, it's good. Pat Mahomes was not bad last night.
No.
He was just under siege, made some great plays. You have to have everybody involved. And there's something about a guy like Tom Brady who gets everybody to buy in on both sides. And that you have a singular focus. And that's why they were able to have so much success last night. They were ready to go from the kick. And no matter even if the Chiefs would have played better, this wouldn't have been a situation where I felt like it would have got out of hand on the other side because they would have continually had answers and continually grinded.
Pretty phenomenal defensive performance last night from Tampa Bay. It shouldn't go overlooked. Tom Brady's going to get a bunch of that credit, Spencer, but just the better team last night obviously won that game. It's not everyone was looking at the officials in that first half and worrying about that was not the difference in this game.
No, the one thing I wanted to add to the Tom Brady thing is he took 8 years off of Super Bowls. So, I mean, 8 years in the middle of his career, he didn't win a Super Bowl, and for him to still get to 7, that's crazy. But I think Todd Bowles was the MVP last night. The way that defense played and the way they were able to just continuously get pressure on him. I know Kansas City was missing both tackles, and the offensive line looked like a makeshift offensive line, especially for the Super Bowl, but you still have to give credit. That defensive front reminded me of when Ohio State plays like Maryland. And it did. It reminded me of, you got Chase Young and all those guys just destroying the Maryland offensive line. That's what it looked like, except it was in the Super Bowl, and it was a bunch of 30-year-old dudes pushing around NFL offensive linemen. It was pretty impressive.
Well, and part of that was, you mentioned Todd Bowles. Granted, Kansas City was down to their 3rd and 4th offensive tackle, which was a big deal. But a lot of that was scripted of how they were going to attack them, keeping 2 guys back, dare them to run the football, not letting Tyreek Hill have the big play over the top, and their linebackers, Levante David, Devin White, wrapping up Kelsey. He led the game. He led the game in catches and yards, but it was late stuff. It was garbage. Didn't have a big 3rd down conversion. And he had some drops, but those guys were all over him. They took care of the screen game. And up front, I know you'll appreciate this, Michael. I don't know if you noticed this. They started taking Vita Vea and Ndamukong Suh, and they flipped them, and they put their defensive ends and Shaq Barrett and Jason Pierre-Paul inside. They crushed it with those guys on the outside, just mushed the tackles back, and those guys were kind of spies that they would wrap late and play off of each other. And that's why Mahomes, as soon as you saw him break contain after those first couple drives, there was nowhere for him to go because those guys were able to close. They had greater speed and were able to track him down.
Yeah, when I watched the Tampa Bay versus Packers game, that was the first time, because it would have been pretty easy money, it felt like, for a while to put your money on Kansas City. It's just the Mahomes, the weapons, Andy Reid, there wasn't much teams could do to slow that offense down. And then you watch that Tampa Bay versus Green Bay game, and you're like, okay, wait a minute. First of all, I didn't remember that JPP and Ndamukong Suh were on that defensive line, and Shaq Barrett, and it was just watching them dominate the Packers' offensive line. Now, the Packers' offensive line, I have a lot of respect for. I think their left tackle was hurt, which opened them up to a lot of tough stuff, especially Shaq Barrett started eating on them. But when you saw that is the only way to slow down a great quarterback. You can't slow them down with clever coverages or anything like that. You need to get in their face. They need to feel uncomfortable. They need to feel pressured. And we saw that against Aaron Rodgers from Tampa Bay. And then they took that and applied the exact same thing to Kansas City, obviously with a little changes here and there to keep them guessing. But I don't remember the last time Patrick Mahomes was held without a touchdown for however long he was held. Never. Okay, there you go. You answered that question. And he was never held that long. On top of that, he looked uncomfortable, especially later in the 3rd quarter. He was dancing around before that pressure even got to him. And Bobby was mentioning it, that they brought the big guys off the edge. You saw that even if nobody was winning clean, they were pushing that pocket so he couldn't just dance around. He couldn't stay in there and be settled. And that kind of thing, especially you go, later in the game, you've been hitting the quarterback, he feels unsettled. That's when those interceptions happen. That's when those drop balls happen because nobody knows when he's going to be able to get the ball out. So watching that game last night, that front 7, I'd love to give all the praise to the D-line, but the defense as a whole, but particularly that front 7, played absolutely out of their minds. They had energy. They were flying around. And that's what happens when you have those big guys up front. That's why when we were talking about Ohio State earlier this year, it was such a big deal that you had Haskell and Tommy in there, because when you can have those big guys in the middle who are pretty quick, it shuts down a huge part of the offense.
Brady's career is it's so wild. I mean, I think it started before Spencer was even born, and he started well before either of you guys got in the league, and now he's staying well after. Obviously the 7 Super Bowls, but the longevity. Michael, I think you had a painful one with your Jacksonville team against him a few years ago before you.
Well, they brought that up, I think, during the game at one point too.
Did they?
Yeah, when then Leonard Fournette. He was
yeah.
He was on the doorstep.
I'm waiting for him.
That part out.
I'm waiting for him to act a fool. I was watching him. I was like, man, how does this dude's getting a Super Bowl? Good for him.
Yeah.
Good for him. But yeah, he's probably got some words about Jacksonville.
What's it like for you two defenders? The experience of getting ready to play Tom Brady, to be on the other side of the formation from him, go against that greatness. I mean, any memories of dealing with him in that situation?
We played him in Dallas once, and that was when they had Moss and Walker in 07.
That sounds fun, yeah.
The unstoppable juggernaut. We were good. We went 13-3, and we're the first place team. And they undressed us, and we're like, we're going to line up and do like 3 or 4 things. We got destroyed. Like, we couldn't guard West in the slot. Randy us over the top. I mean, it was just everything we thought we could do, we weren't able to execute with, because Tom was reading our mail. Like, if he knows he's going to see pre-snap, and that was the one thing. They were able to run the ball last night. When you run the ball, you cannot be exotic in coverage. Like, this flipping of the defensive ends and defensive tackles, you can't do that if they're running the football on you, because they'll just gas you up the middle because your D ends are inside. And so they were able to run the ball. A lot of their passes were play action. So when you do that, then your coverages get a lot simpler. You can't sit there and move around, adjust. You're not getting them in the 3rd and longs to be able to bring some stuff. And, we played them in Detroit, did the same thing. We were actually tight. I think it was on Thanksgiving or right around there. And, then he found our one corner. One of our dudes who was young, like, second-year guy, thought he could, like, bait him. And Tom, like, pump faked him and then threw it over his head. And our defensive coordinator, watched him film the next day. He's like, did you really think that you were going to be able to fool this guy? He's like, you can fool some other guy. Did you think you're going to get him? He's like, you're a smart guy. He went to Wake Forest. He's like, I thought you were smart. He's like, you're the dumbest smart guy I know. If you thought you were going to get one over on this guy, he knew what you were doing before you even thought about it. He'd watched the film. He'd seen you do it 1,000,000 times, and he hit you. But like, going against him, probably the best was in practice, because training camp and OTAs going back and forth. And Jordan Mayo and I were playing inside together, and just being able to change stuff. And they gave you a lot of freedom up there to do that. So Tom would make an adjustment. You'd kind of figure out what it was, changing things, and going back and forth. And he had so many answers all the time. And you just saw that last night. Like, once you can run it, they couldn't do much. So he knew he was going to identify the coverage and find the weak spot.
Yeah, we played against Tom a couple times. We did joint practices with him, and then we played against him twice, both in Foxborough. And the first one was a regular season game. And when I say, I think we lost 52-10 or something. It was disgusting. And the whole week leading up to it, you could feel the respect they had for Tom Brady in the locker room. Like, we're in film. You're like, okay, guys, we don't have to introduce him.
Yeah.
But like, they have a countdown. I'm sure Bob knows all about it, where a quarterback usually gets rid of the ball in like 2.2 seconds or something. That's the league average. And that year, Tom Brady had been getting the ball out of his hands in 1.7 seconds. You can't do anything against that. Like, there's no way you can't run 5 yards in 1.7 seconds or whatever it is. So, and then he went out and beat the crap out of us. And the other one was in the AFC Championship game in 2017. We had a great team, a great defense, and we had a good game plan for him. But one of the plays last night, when it was right before the end of the second half, and he launched that long ball to Mike Evans. I don't know if you guys saw Mike Evans drag his feet to get tripped up, but that's what they do. Right before the half, they're going to launch that long ball, and they did that to us in the AFC Championship, and what they're hoping for is a penalty. And, it's very hard as a DB to track the ball, keep up with your man, get your eyes around, and make a play on the ball. 9 times out of 10, Tom Brady's throwing that bomb, the refs are throwing a flag. And that's what they got. And that brought me a flashback, because it was all downhill after that for us. And it was all downhill for Kansas City after that. So he is just a consummate professional. He knows everything that's going on in that field. He recognizes it immediately. If he knows what the weak spots in a defense might be, he has his eye out for it, and he'll recognize it before anybody else and expose it. He's just absolutely incredible to watch. and it sounds like we got another 12 years of him playing in the NFL. So I don't know when he's going to slow down. He's in better shape than me at 43 years old.
It's crazy. It was also, weird just not to have any Ohio State presence in that game as much as.
Oh, there was plenty in the back there. A lot of guys that either came or should have come. I think the whole Tampa Bay secondary, when you start looking at it, from Jamel Dean to Winfield, I mean,
that's all right.
There was a number of guys.
I don't know those connections. I don't know we're going to count Jamel Dean's 3 days on campus, but
he wanted to come here. He tried to play.
All right.
What should I say? All our Buckeyes.
All our Buckeyes.
If you come for a day, then that counts.
I mean, Winfield's dad played here. He would have. I would wager a fairly large sum of money that if he would have been offered by Ohio State, he would have attended Ohio State.
I honestly can't believe that he was never offered.
Wasn't tall enough. Whatever that means. Well, I don't know.
He's tall enough to win a Super Bowl.
Tall enough to win a Super Bowl.
And that's what everybody gets caught up in this. And the argument is, height and stars. Someone tweeted me, height and stars don't matter. I go, they do matter, but there are exceptions.
Yes.
He's an exception to the rule, and his father was an exception to the rule at a high level in the NFL. So I'm gonna roll the dice on that exception there. I mean, it's not like you're gonna offer every 5'8" guy who may not run a 4.3, but his dad was a really good player. He had really good film. You knew what you were getting. Worst case, you knew you were going to get a good football player, maybe not a star, and he ultimately became that. So that's why it hurts me that he was a Gopher and not a Buckeye.
Sometimes you have to trust the bloodlines.
Yeah.
And then the point also, like how many other guys that could be there. Spencer, you touched on this with 4 of the last 5 now, NFL Rookie Defensive Player of the Year.
Oh gosh.
If we're talking about maybe JT Tuimalau here, looking Chase Young, a couple Bosas, Denzel Ward, I believe is the other. 4 out of the last 5. That's quite a dynasty of that developed here going on to the next level. At least that over the weekend when Ohio State didn't claim that they played in every Super Bowl except 5 like Penn State graphics. They at least had some presence to celebrate over the weekend. Yeah,
Chase Young was as impressive as any rookie in the NFL, offense or defense, and it would have been a crime for him not to get that award. I don't know if they'll win it again for the 5th out of 6th year. Somebody's going to have to shock me. Maybe Shaun Wade will have a better rookie year than a lot of people expect, but that pipeline's not going anywhere. You look at a guy like Tyreek Smith, could potentially be a first-round pick next year, make it 6 out of 8 or 5 out of 7 or whatever the number would be. That pipeline is not going away. I think they have an opportunity to have a lot more of these guys, and to be able to go right into the NFL and dominate the way all 4 of those guys have, when you talk about the Bosas, which they speak for themselves, Marshawn Lattimore, who had probably his best season was his rookie season, and then Chase, who's just going to continue to get better. It's so impressive what Larry Johnson and the entire defensive staff does.
We also had a couple offensive player rookies of the year, didn't we? We
had Zeke.
Yeah, was
Zeke
Michael Thomas not one?
No.
Okay.
They couldn't both be it. They came out together.
That's right. Yeah. I was about to say there's too many options out here. It's hard to keep up with it.
We don't have any offensive guys here. Jay-Z's not. We'll just talk about the Silver Bullets today. Don't worry about that. Don't have to give them equal time.
So, how do you get better recruiting than that? 4 of the last 5 defensive rookies of the year are Ohio State Buckeyes. How do you go to a kid's house who wants to be in the NFL, a Pro Bowler, all that kind of stuff, and have to convince him to come to play, whatever defensive position at Ohio State when you're just pumping out talent like this? I mean, you could point to the defensive rookies of the year. You could point to defensive player of the weeks. You can point to contracts signed, and everything points to, hey, come to Ohio State if you want to be successful. And it feels like it's just gonna keep building that way.
And I think, Bob, that's probably why you look at this specific case we're talking about. The only recruit in this class that Ohio State's still trying to sign, he's going to wait it out till April. It's basically an Ohio State or Alabama. He's never visited Columbus, so why is he in the mix? Probably because we're talking about Chase Young, Joey Bosa, Nick Bosa, Michael Bennett, Adolphus Washington, all these guys over the years. It's clear, the evidence on film.
Oh, it is. And a lot of that now, it's Larry Johnson, too. He does a great job relating to those guys. He cares. He loves his players when you talk to them. And like any one of his players, whether they played at Penn State, like Tamba Ali came here and was working with our guys. He's a Penn State dude. And I played against Tamba Ali, great guy. Kansas City Chief, for a long time. And, comes in and is working just because he loves Larry so much, because Larry's invested into him so much through his, not just in college, but the entirety of his career. And so you see that and you're like, this is a guy that I want to work on me. He works on great players, but he legitimately cares about you, and you have a relationship with him that transcends just the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to look at that on paper. Like, obviously Alabama's got a great program and turns out a bunch of pros, but if you are a defensive lineman, you're a number 1 player in the country, I just can't imagine saying no to Larry Johnson.
There's no telling how long Coach Johnson's going to keep coaching, but the chance to work with him, like you said, all the talent that he pumps out, and you won't understand until you're around him, until you're coached by him, why he's able to pump out that much talent, why these guys want to come play for him. Like Bobby said, he genuinely cares about players, and his communication style is just leagues above a lot of other coaches because he's able to motivate, he's able to educate, and he can do it all with building up your self-confidence, all with making you feel like you're being looked after, all that kind of stuff. And that's really rare. He becomes a father figure for a lot of guys. And like you said, Tamba Ali's coming back. There are a lot of guys who will come back and work with Coach Jay who are in the NFL in the offseason. And that's where, there's so many places where you can go work. There's so many places where you can go get great coaching, but they choose to come back to a college that isn't theirs to work with a man because of how good he is. And so every D lineman in high school, I would think, would want to work or want to be coached by Coach Johnson. I'm sure there are other good defensive line coaches, but he just brings a different level of urgency, and he brings a different level of attention to detail that a lot of these places can't compete with.
Yeah, and you talked, Bob and Michael, about Tamba Ali coming back. It's all of them, and even when they could have gone anywhere last summer. They were looking for a place to work out. So Chase Young, they're in a field like out in Dublin with Coach Jay. You have Tyquan Lewis, some guys that I didn't even mention. Tyquan Lewis is out there.
Jonathan Hankins comes back from time to time.
Hankins, Tracy Sprinkle, Sam Hubbard, Chase Young. He left Jalen Holmes. Chase Young was training out in Malibu, and he's like, all right, I'm just going to go to Columbus and work out on a field with nothing else except a couple bags because Larry Johnson's working there.
And he had a great year this year.
Yeah, I can't imagine that is that common other places.
No, it's not common anywhere else.
No.
Even a place like Alabama, a place like, number one, Columbus is a little bit nicer than a lot of college towns, but you have a coach there, you have these relationships, and it's not. I'm telling you right now, I've talked to a lot of guys, and why would you want to go back to Columbus in the offseason? Because this is it. I mean, you like living here, but then you have these coaches and the people that are around you that just impact you in such a positive way.
I think the most impressive thing about Larry Johnson to me is when you watch pregame NFL stuff, a lot of guys are just getting some stretching in. You see every Ohio State defensive line alum, they're all doing the hand drills still. And then you go to the opposite end of that. Last year when we were allowed to go to one spring practice, I saw Darion Henry struggle to do a hand placement drill. By November, they're showing the pregame warm-up stuff. He's doing it as well as Jonathan Cooper. You learn that quickly, and it never leaves you. So then you watch Joey Bosa, Nick Bosa, these guys pull a guy aside in the pregame, they're doing the NFL pregame stuff, and you see them do the hand placement drills, and then you watch the game, and it's like, oh, I saw that exact move in pregame on air, and that guy's doing the exact same thing. I wonder who taught him that. Well, it's probably the best defensive line coach in America.
That sticks with him. We got a lot more we're going to get into with the Ohio State coaching staff, some off-season transactions and possibilities. We're going to get into that after we take a quick break here on Lettermen Live, which is brought to you by Roosters.
Roosters is one of the unique companies that we deal with. They're involved in everything we do, from our personal foundation to also the Cancer Research Fund. And that's from the Buckeye Cruise from Cancer to all the events leading up to the Buckeye Cruise.
They donate back to different organizations that are near and dear to their heart. And we're so fortunate to have been with Roosters now for a long, long time.
All the folks at Roosters are just genuinely kind folks, and they want to make a difference.
Thank you, Roosters Foundation.
Thank you, Roosters Foundation.
Thank you, Roosters Foundation.
All right, welcome back into the Lettermen Lounge. This is Lettermen Live. It's brought to you by Roosters, which got a new song for you to work on, Bob. Tomorrow's appetizer, $2 Tuesday appetizer, cheesy bacon fries.
Oh, boy, cheesy bacon fries. So delicious, so good. I'm going to send them to Schlegs tonight so we can eat them at Appetizer Tuesday.
Put him on the plane down to Jacksonville with a plate of cheesy bacon fries. I mean, obviously, mac and cheese bites is where it's at for him, so he might not be that interested. The mozzarella sticks are somehow surviving down there by Michael for now.
I was trying to save some for Spencer before I just inhale them.
Yeah, all right. But come get that tomorrow. $2 all day, appetizer Tuesday, the best part of your week, if you can't make it to Lettermen Live on Monday. Simple as that. Come get it. Last week, as expected, we talked about it on Monday when we were in here, Bob, that Parker Fleming was expected to get that promotion, that Matt Barnes was going to get more responsibility in the secondary. And lo and behold, that happened. What do you guys make of these moves before we get into one that may happen and shake things up even more?
So, Matt Barnes obviously was already working with the secondary and running and coordinating the special teams. So it's good. It keeps the language the same. There's a familiarity there. It puts two guys in the secondary, kind of full-time, which I like. So that way Kerry can kind of coordinate the defense, focus on corner technique. He's one of the best corner technique coaches you're going to find Let Barnes kind of handle the safeties and everything else. Love that. And so then, Parker Fleming comes in. He knows the system. He understands the expectations here. And I think it fits. I think it really works. So I like what they did here. You didn't necessarily need to go out of pocket to go find some big name unless you felt like you really needed that. And based upon how you're recruiting and everything, like Kerry Combs is the guy that recruits the secondary. And he's getting great players. So it's not like you need to go out there and find a guy. And you want to make sure you had a personality fit on the staff. That's the other big piece is when you look at this, you need to make sure your staff all gets along and respects each other, and they don't have egos. And I think that is all still intact right now with that staff.
Like you said, Kerry Combs is the guy that the secondary still runs through. I would love to make sure that he still has a presence there. The amount of talent that he's produced, the way he coaches, the presence he has in that locker room is massive. So you don't want to get him too far away from that secondary group, especially in a pivotal year like this where we're coming off a year where the secondary was where we were struggling. You want him to be more involved and all that kind of stuff. All that being said, it's good to bring guys in that he can mentor, that he can teach, and who can let him kind of spend more time in the whole grand scheme of things while he can trust them to keep building these guys, keep making that secondary better, and he can help them out, or he can give them some advice on what needs to be done and keep checking in with that room from time to time. But Kerry Combs isn't going to be here for another 20 years as Ohio State's secondary coach anyways, so it's good to get some...
I don't know. He's got a lot of
That man's
juice.
Vitality is crazy, but...
As long as there's Red Bull and coffee on this planet, he's going to be
It'll be
working.
all right. But it's good to get some guys that are coming in and getting used to the system, and if they're more homegrown, that's even better. But I think Kerry Combs is the guy you want to be more involved with your secondary, and it's good that he's getting more involved with the defense as a whole, just because of the amount of experience he brings to the table.
Yeah, Spencer, we talked about this last week. That everybody is comparing it to Alabama, and that's going to be the way it works forever. And no, they did not bring in a former NFL head coach to join the staff or an army of analysts, although there could be a couple. Paul Rhodes might be a name that you file away for Ohio State this offseason as someone who could come in to help out. But you look at this, like it's more of a Clemson model of chemistry, continuity, familiarity, and bringing guys up through the ranks. And Parker Fleming has twice paid his dues in the Ohio State program. He was there with you, Michael, at 2012 and 13, then left with Everett Withers. A couple stops where he was a full-time coach, James Madison and Texas State. Comes back to Ohio State, serves in this quality control role under Ryan Day, gets to know that. So he checks all those boxes for what Ryan Day's been looking for.
Yeah, and it makes sense because there's two programs that have won 2 titles in the last 4 years. Alabama's one of them. Everybody wants to model themselves after Alabama and bring in all these NFL names, but there's also the Clemson model that is basically the Ohio State model before Clemson even did it. So it makes a lot of sense to go that route and not, upset anybody in the building, not have to bring in these $1 million coordinators, not have to bring in these former NFL head coaches for everybody to, have their hand in what's going on. I think it just makes more sense for this program to take this route and promote Parker Fleming and have Matt Barnes spend a year learning how to teach the technique under Kerry Combs, and now he gets to apply it, and he gets to teach the technique some, as Kerry is also helping out. Kerry gets to spend a lot more time with all the other defensive coaches. I think this is a win-win-win-win-win. It's the Clemson model over the Alabama model, and I think that, obviously Ryan Day prefers it, but I think the more Ohio State fans, I guess, understand why it's happening, they're going to like the move more than if you bring in an NFL head coach for a rehab center.
Well, it seems like everybody who has been around Parker Fleming in that role for Ohio State has raved about, his intelligence. Obviously, Ryan Day's vote is the only one that really matters. Michael, I don't know how many special teams units you were working on in 2012 or 13 when he was –
Not many.
Yeah, but he was helping Kerry Combs back then. So there's another, tie. Kerry was the special teams coordinator. Familiarity with Combs, familiarity with Day now.
Yeah, at this point, we should trust Ryan Day's judgment on at least personality in coaching. He hasn't made too many missteps when it comes to bringing people on staff, and especially in college coaching, a lot of it, like Bob was saying, is about chemistry, and it's about continuity. And you bring a guy who's been with the program for quite a while, and even, he left and had some experience at other places, but he understands what Ohio State's about. He has pride in Ohio State. He has love for the city of Columbus and the state of Ohio. And that kind of thing, I think, is a bigger deal than we give it credit for, especially in college football, because more so when you're playing for a city or you're playing for a state that you grew up in, that kind of pride, that kind of understanding amongst everybody brings the most out of everybody. and makes them want to play harder or coach harder or do more, study more, whatever it is. So to bring guys in that understand how important Ohio State is and have a love for the program is only going to benefit you, even if they don't have as much experience or knowledge as some former head coach. They're going to work hard. They're going to work hard to understand it. They're going to be coached by coaches that they know and that they respect, and it's not going to be nearly as much of an ego grab or a power grab that you might see from a Bill O'Brien, who seemed, if you talk about how players felt about him, not very many people had felt very fondly about Bill O'Brien, so he goes to Alabama in a reduced role from what he's been. You wonder what kind of effect on a team that's going to have.
So I think Drake said, all I care about is money in the city that I'm from. So you kind of stick with that mantra, then I think it's
Can't
good.
go wrong.
Yeah.
That's just Drake has a great way of just distilling it down to the bare bones.
There's a lyric for everything.
Yeah. Bob, you spend much time around Parker Fleming in either of those two stops?
I got a chance to see him the first time he was around here, and I think he did a good job. And it was you're just watching his interaction with the players. He's a young guy. He has a lot of energy. You can tell he's technically sound in how he coaches, and he's very relatable to the players. And so that's the big piece. Like, do you know what you're doing, and can you relate to your players and communicate it? And so he checks both of those boxes. I'm curious to see how they'll use him in recruiting, how that's going to factor in, and if there's any other areas that he'll help out with. That's something that also kind of keep an eye on. But I think he's going to do a fine job here. And he's very, like I said, he's technically sound and relates well to guys. And if those two things are checked, then you have a pretty high floor for success.
And we talked about this last week when he's obviously sliding into the vacancy that was created by Greg Madison's retirement. And if we're just solely talking about bringing that up with what does Parker Fleming bring as a recruiter? Well, they didn't use Greg Madison as a recruiter, so anything they get from Parker Fleming would be a bonus. I think that's sort of the evolution here. They got what they needed from Greg Madison, 2 years of mentorship, 2 years of working with the linebackers, and then Ryan Day decided that he needed something else. Now, the whole thing that could upset this apple cart is if $1.5 million from Tennessee is enough to get Al Washington to leave this staff, which this is a big deal because we're sitting here, last Wednesday, Ryan Day's got that complete coaching staff. He's comfortable. He wanted that continuity. Boy, if you take Al Washington out of this group, it's a position coach, but it's a much bigger deal for Ohio State, in my opinion. He's got a lot to weigh. $1.5 million for Al Washington would be a raise currently of $1 million for what he's making to be the linebackers coach. He'd be the defensive coordinator for the Vols, although I don't think that, at least what I've been told from people that I still know in Knoxville, that he would not be the sole play caller for the defense. So these things have to be weighed. When you're looking at the mess that Tennessee is, a new coach, roster turnover with, 30% of their roster in the transfer portal. To me, it's not appealing, and I just think Al Washington can do better. But it's going to be up.
That's a lot of portal action right there.
It's credible, including their best linebacker. So who Al Washington is currently recruiting to come out of the transfer portal to join Ohio State. So that's another factor to work there. He's been spending the last couple of weeks recruiting against that program and talking about how great Ohio State is, how much they need him. Because, really, just beyond Al Washington, those 4 linebackers are gone too. So That's a mouthful. I think it's a big deal that Ohio State, Gene Smith, Ryan Day make an offer with some of that Greg Madison money to keep Al Washington.
So I just referenced the Drake drop.
Yeah.
Where is Al Washington from?
He's from Columbus, Ohio.
From Columbus, Ohio. I believe he went to Bishop Watterson, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Went to Bishop Watterson, then went to Boston College. He is a Columbus guy. He is my age. His family's from here. Most guys that are from here, and I think you've seen this, even with like Fick, who was here for a long time, Marcus Freeman, who's down at Cincinnati. It takes an overwhelming financial offer of something that you haven't had to be able to move you. Ohio State can get in the ballpark of where they need to be with Tennessee. I believe that he would probably prefer to stay here. I think of all things being equal, he would definitely stay here if you can just get to the same level. Now, Ryan coming out and talking about he's not going to name a co-coordinator. Well, you know what? Things change, all right? And so I didn't want to have to name a co-coordinator, but we're going to do that now because this is the way to keep this guy. We're going to give him a co-coordinator, give him a title bump, give him a pay raise. You know what? College football is an expensive business. The stakes are high. And, people may cringe at that and say, hey, he's a great recruiter. He's a really good coach. He cares about Ohio State. He enjoys it here. I don't know if you have to pay him the full 1.5, but it's got to be close, and he's going to have the title bump. And I'm going to do my best to try to recruit him. I help him recruit guys. I'm going to try to recruit him to stay because I think he's really good at his job. And I hope that Gene Smith understands that. And you guys, I don't care. Schlegs talks about that rat hole money. You got to find that somewhere, whether it's in the McDonald's bags, the Wendy's bags. I don't care wherever it's at. Sometimes you need to use that on your coaches too.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. McDonald's bags. You're going to go to some place that's probably about to be on probation. I'm knocking over the sign. Like, you guys know, I used to cover that program before I was saved and got to come to Columbus, Ohio, and got my whole life turned around.
A lot of hot showers when you're covering that program.
Well, that's the Ball for Life program. Derek Dooley was installing that, teaching them how to, get themselves properly clean. That place is a mess. It has been for 15 years. That's not going to magically change because they finally got rid of Philip Fulmer or brought in a new coach from Central Florida who they needed to pay $125,000 for their new AD to hire the guy that he just hired. And they're digging into NCAA violations, which they used to fire the last guy. The NCAA, they just got their case handed to them. Why would you go to Tennessee if you're Al Washington for anything?
So this is my mentality on it. I would never be mad at somebody for going to the money, especially if you haven't hit that big payday yet.
Sure.
You go do what you got to do for your family, for yourself, whatever it is. This feels like more of one of those situations where now you have been shown, your value has been shown on the market. Okay. And that's the biggest part of it is, it's like asking a real estate agent to price your house and all of a sudden it's worth $50,000 more. You're like, all right, someone's got to pay me. And I think that's kind of what this is now he has proof to Ohio State, hey, this is what I'm worth. And for him, when it comes to a career perspective, I don't even think this would be a good move for him to go to Tennessee from a career perspective. I think you spend a couple more years at Ohio State, maybe like Bob said, they give you a little pay raise, they give you a title bump. He has the opportunity to go to some big programs and make a lot of money or inherit some big positions at Ohio State. And I am sure that he understands what kind of situation he's in. So I see this more as the kind of go back to your employer's table and say, hey, we're going to need a little bump up. And, you start touching around 7 figures, he might be a little bit more, he might acquiesce a little bit more. But I'm excited for him that he's got some bargaining power. Yeah. Now let's just hope he's clear-headed enough to be like, I don't know if I really want to go jump into that snake pit of Tennessee over this place at Ohio State where you love your head coach. Your athletic director for a long time has been very supportive of the football program. The city absolutely loves football, and you get the opportunity to coach some stellar athletes. It would be hard to find a better place, but Ohio State should definitely pay the man.
Listen, the offer that he's getting, it better start with two. It better be 2 commas, and it's a 2-comma offer.
Yeah,
that's 2-comma offer. Like
7 figures, 2 commas.
That's the reality of what it needs to be, and people may not like that. And they got spoiled here with Heartline because Brian's a former player. He's from Canton. His wife's from here.
Pulling that Tom Brady pay cut.
But he also played
7 years of NFL
he also
money.
played in the NFL and got a pretty nice deal. And so he has a little more patience and things. And this is the only place he's ever really lived. Like Al's bounced. I don't think he would want to move if given the choice, but you have to get in the ballpark. You cannot just say, well, you love it here, stay. Well, that's easy for someone to say who's in a good financial position.
And this works out for Brian Hartline, too. They pay Al Washington. Brian Hartline's looking around like, all right, hey, I'm pretty good at what I do, too.
Oh, yeah.
And that might be one of those things that Gene's worrying about. Like, if I pay him, then I got to pay 2 other people. But you need to keep him.
He'd be making $1 million at any SEC school right now.
Easily.
If he wanted to.
He is,
without
easily.
question. And go back to it. I know everything has changed with the pandemic, and there weren't fans to make a bunch of money last year, but $1.1 million did open up. Parker Fleming is not going to be taking a big chunk of that. Al Washington, Brian Hartline, the 2 guys that we named, they need a lot of that money. Mm-hmm. They've earned it, and you have to keep them around because, Spencer, the other part, if we're going to talk about it, with the coaching staffs in Alabama and Clemson, the Clemson model includes paying those guys for their loyalty, which Elliott just last week goes over the $2 million mark. So both of their coordinators are making over $2 million. Doesn't necessarily. I don't think that's going to happen at Ohio State anytime soon. Took them a long time to get to 7 figures.
Buy my love. Put the money on the nightstand. Let's go.
But that's the other part of this. If you're going to keep them around and keep that continuity, you're going to have to pay for it. That's just a fact of life now.
Yeah, and the thing about it is everybody was clamoring for a big name to come in and replace Greg Madison. Well, if that happens, you have to pay all that money to the new big name. And then, hey, also you need to keep Brian Hartline. Also, you need to make sure that you have some money in the bank for when Al Washington gets a call from an SEC school and wants to pay him $1.5 million, that you can counteroffer and say, hey, you need to stay here. All of these moving parts work together, and I think that's what now it comes full circle with this Parker Fleming move. Now, like you said, Ohio State has some money freed up. If they choose to spend it, they'll probably be able to keep Al Washington. If they choose not to spend it and keep the staff the way it is, Al Washington's probably going to take a hike down to Knoxville.
And that's the beauty of those homegrown guys is, you have these guys who have learned behind these coaches that you are paying vast sums of money to, but they're still young. They're still kind of getting their feet under them. So you don't have to pay them $1 million or $2 million, but it is just a continuation of what you've been getting. And that's why it's so, in my mind, it is so important to have not just a great way to develop players, but you need to develop new coaches within your building so that they can come up and work their own way. Yeah, from time to time they're going to leave, but that's good. They're bringing new ideas when they come back to Ohio State, and it just speaks to the strength of Ohio State's culture. It speaks to the strength of, or the amount of love that people have for this city, that so many people want to come back.
Well, Super Bowls in the past, national championship in the past. It's time for the offseason drama. We're getting right into it. It's an interesting one. Ohio State has one coaching move. They're waiting on another. We'll be talking about it every Monday on Lettermen Live at Roosters, no matter what happens. Appreciate Bobby Carpenter and Michael Bennett, as always, bringing that knowledge from the Silver Bullets, and Spencer Holbrook joining me for a Monday at Roosters, eating those cheesy bacon fries. You should have seen him during the break, by the way. I mean, he was just dangling up here. Looked delicious. I'm just Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us again this week on Lettermen Live. It's brought to you by Roosters. We will see you again next week for a fun, casual conversation at a fun, casual joint.